Bazinga!
The early 2000s was a wild time. At least for me, because the 90s bled so far into them. Yeah, that's how I choose to set the stage. Game came out in 03, I talked about the early 2000s. What do you want from me? Cookie, get out of here. You could talk about Rainbow Six, but I say Prince of Persia is Ubisoft's best franchise. The quality of its platforming and the smooth level design more or less created the acrobatic platformer. I don't think there are any other acrobatic platformers. Oi, mate! What about the classic Prince of Persia games? I don't care. The Sans trilogy has the widest appeal, and I like them better. Yes, Sans trilogy. Don't talk about Forgotten Sans. But being that it's quality, Ubisoft didn't take long to shit the bed on it. But I'll talk about that later. For now, it's happy time. Sands of time. Whoa. Yeah, there was this one kid I knew growing up. He said something so stupid I'll never forget it when I mentioned Prince of Persia one time.
Fuck that game!
We were 8.
Running on walls and shit? That's not realistic.
Yeah, well, eat shit, moron. You want realism? How about I slap you one? Your name is David, bitch. You were born to be an NPC. Who names their kid David? My name isn't David. Anyway, everybody likes this game because it's a good one. Weirdly not good enough to leave a lasting impression on the industry. I guess animation blending would become more important to some devs after this game came out, but the impact was more on the players. Like, Uncharted would focus on platforming puzzles and stuff, but outside of that one series that started like 4 years later, I can't think of another example of an acrobatic platformer. Everyone that saw Sands of Time back in the day was wowed by at least one part of it. It just looked so good. Graphically, it was pretty, the combat flowed so smoothly, and the platforming was like nothing we'd seen before. Not a single game had done what Sands of Time did with its acrobatics. It also had a simple story. Forgettably so, but it also had some top-tier characters in the prince, he never gets a name, and Farah, the girl of the game. There isn't anything deep or groundbreaking about them or their progression as characters, but their banter is super fun. Yuri Lowenthal will forever be my prince. I'll be glad if he never hears that. This Sand Ninja thing, it's a setting I want more of. Is that racist? The Middle East houses some of the oldest stories ever told, and most of the mythology is completely untouched. Later games in the series would try emulating God of War, mileage may vary, or something, but never is the actual mythology of the cultures we see even touched. That was a weird sentence. I still have dreams about that cool Assassin's Creed prototype where you played as the royal guard protecting a young Prince of Persia man. Why can't Assassin's Creed be good? The type of acrobatics that Ubisoft would go on to favor in Ass Creed would have realism in mind, and while it was a neat curio, it got old real fast. The games quickly became boring, in my opinion. I'm right, but I still have to say that. Talking about Prince of Persia, though, Ubi's obsession with parkour came from this series. Without Pop, we wouldn't have Ass Creed, Watch Dogs, Far Cry, or... they don't make anything else. Anyway, the verticality that they design all 4 of their games with came from Prince of Persia, is what I'm saying. And they'd never do it this well again. The Prince of Persia games like to use right angles to help the player navigate. We only ever drop straight down, climb straight up, jump directly back off a wall, or jump straight across gaps. This designing on a line thing that Ubisoft did helps to simplify the level design and minimize confusion. If you happen to get lost mid-section, you only have 3 directions to choose from, left, right, or back, depending on the context. Should the platforming have been designed with oblong angles in mind, the level design becomes infinitely more complex. Hi, yeah, editing Art of Mashing guy here at like 1:30 a.m. I realize I didn't explain this very well, so I'm just going to interject this little piece right here. What I mean is this little clip from the beta of Rival Swords, or whatever you want to call it, shows that they had to fix this horizontal, or rather this angular wall jumping by adding a shutter. to the game so that you knew when you saw that shutter, you were going to be doing a jump off at an angle, because it didn't make sense to us that we could grab this ledge but not that one, jump off at an angle here but not there. Suddenly they introduce momentum-based platforming, but these environments are so cramped that it's kind of hard to tell what you can and can't grab onto. That's really all I meant. I really hope that explains that section a little better. I'm not gonna edit this part because I have to keep moving. As it is, each beam, ledge, pillar all lead to the next platform directly. Platforming sections are designed linearly, but they hide that linearity. The best parts of Sands of Time are the platform puzzle rooms. They drop you in a room and you gotta gymacologist your way out. It's awesome. As this was a new concept at the time, entering a room will sometimes cause the camera to pan around the environment and straight up show you what you're supposed to do and where it will lead. For the most part though, you'll have to find the path up and out by paying attention to the subtle use of colors. White, or contrast, equals progression. Since most of the walls of the palace are yellowish or blue or white or whatever, I'm colorblind, get out. The broken pieces of walls or ceiling that fall to the floor guide our eyes in the early hours of the game. The geometry itself is also kept simple, as the rubble will always form stairs or be perfectly flat on top to signify that we can stand on it. We can trust the level design to lead us to whatever mechanism will open the door out. While this can sound restrictive, the designers took great care to introduce many types of interesting challenges and did very well in hiding the linear nature of the design by theming the props and gaps around whatever area we're in. If we go outside, the columns we've been climbing become trees. The ledges we've been jumping to become cliff edges. There are no ladders outdoors. At one point we enter an aviary, and this section revolves around wall running on the sides of the cage and spin flipping off the various poles in the area that served as perches for the birds that used to live here before they all died. We'll have to figure out each section by playing around the theming of the level. Later in the game you can see the levels get more linear and you'll notice suspiciously placed poles and beams to jump on, but by then I'd assume we're all just so familiar with the game's language that it doesn't really bother anyone. Except me. A little bit. Traps are another way that platforming is spiced up. Sometimes we have to navigate them under a time limit, cause that's fun. Trap hallways will appear throughout the entire series, and they serve as a break from the jumping and wall running by testing our reflexes on the ground. Roll at the right time and you don't get hurt. Some of these are too complex for people to handle, but you and me, we're hardcore gamers. We can do this part. Ah shit. Oh yeah, and there are puzzles. Ones that don't rely on platforming as much. They're usually kept pretty simple, and with no central mechanic to leverage outside of the prince's agility, most of them boil down to pulling levers in the right sequence. Don't let that description sell them short though, they're still fun. They just use more binary mechanics to solve rather than relying on physics, weight, or time dilation. I understand the decision to forego time-based puzzles and sections to simplify everything around parkour and brain teasers, and to avoid soft locks should one screw up too many times and run out of sands, but I'd still like to see the idea explored in a potential future game.
Don't mention Forgotten Sands.
Anyway, the levels are designed and themed around the aesthetics of their environment, and they keep things fresh and flowing. The game wants us to move forward at all times, and uses contrasting colors to great effect to guide our eyes towards our next jump. Really, the platforming in Sands of Time is great. I can't say anything about it that hasn't been said and parroted every day since it released. Rarely, it can be kinda hard to see where we need to go to next, and this only ever seems to happen over death pits, but that's why we have the first-person cam and time powers. Really, the whole trilogy has at least a handful of sections where depth perception kinda screws you on a jump, so in that case, I would say that particular jump, wherever it may be, is iffy. Like, that falls under the I can't see it brand of challenge, and by now you might know how I feel about that. Either way, first-person camera, yes, it arms the flow, but it only happens like twice per game. Something that sucks a fat dick is the landscape camera changing perspective suddenly and flipping the controls on us. That's annoying. You can lose like 10 seconds of time from trying to figure out which direction to press, and 30 years off your life from the strain the frustration puts on your heart. Was that just me? Oh god, and as long as we're talking about shortening my lifespan, let me mention the stupid magic door section at the end. Fake-ass Lost Woods. Talk about a pace killer. What even is this? Who okayed this? Who designed this? Who wanted this? There's no tell for what door you have to go through, only what doors you have been through. And if you go through the wrong door, it all resets. Why did... Well, hey, this is weird. I normally don't touch on story in these videos, but here we are. I don't know who was in charge of character dialogue, but they did good. And whoever was in charge of the overall story is still employed at Ubisoft, because this story sucks. It's not even that the story itself is bad, it's just that the whole thing fits into a paragraph, and towards the end of that paragraph, the story halts for the entire game to happen, and it finishes with a single sentence. It's told in a cool way, with the prince narrating the events as they happen and offering his thoughts, but that isn't enough to build it up none. Look, it's like this. Spoilers ahead. The Persian army raid an Indian palace on their way to visit the Sultan of Azad at the behest of the vizier, basically an advisor to the Maharaja, an Indian king. Now the vizier suggests the raid because he wants access to the sands of time so he can live forever, as he has coughing up blood disease. But when the prince gets access to the dagger of time before he can, he's more or less unable to move forward with his plan, as the dagger functions as a key, unlocking the sands. Shortly after the prince gets his hands on the dagger, he's convinced to unlock the sands. Then everyone but him, Farah, the Maharaja's daughter, and the vizier are turned into sand zombies. The game happens, and 10 hours later, the sands are closed, the prince is returned back in time, punks the vizier, who, by the way, outs himself as a traitor during the fight. All you had to do was not that, and the prince would have been screwed. Then Kakolukia decides to leave the dagger with Farah, and the story ends. The story is the premise. There's no development throughout for the story, but instead for the characters. The prince goes from a spoiled bitch baby obsessed with revenge and honor and glory and stuff all true warriors strive for, to a guy who doesn't do that shit anymore. I accidentally deleted that part of my original recording, so I had to re-record this one during editing, sorry. And Farah falls in love with the prince after he fall down one time. Their progression as characters is believable, and good even, but the romance is the whiplashingest thing ever. The story events don't really change the prince, and the environments don't reflect the story, outside of them being sandy and stuff. I think there's a moment where the prince goes into a torture chamber in a prison section, and he mentions how he'd never seen one before, but that's about as close as I can remember to us getting. Wait, what? The locations we move through are just locations we move through. They don't advance the prince or Farah's characters by reflecting any kind of symbolism or whatever in the story. Like, at a point, Farah suggests that the prince meet her in the bathhouse, and she does it really flippantly, if I remember correctly. This pisses the prince off, because she has a direct path, and he doesn't, so he assumes she's gonna be chillin' while he's doing all his puzzle platforming. Then when they meet in the bath, you'd think this would be kind of an intimate place that they could bond in, but they just kind of don't, and this is where the love confession happens super suddenly. They have more development in hallways and puzzle rooms than in any noteworthy locations that would reflect the present context for said development. Did that make any sense? That said, the character interactions carry the story content of this game, and I don't want this section to sound like a massive knock against the game. This is one of those gameplay first kind of things, so don't let this section color your impressions if you've been thinking about trying this one out. Resistance Fall of Man spoiled me on how well it blended its story and gameplay, so when a game doesn't do that, I notice is all. Ah shit, was this whole section pointless? This combat sucks. Sands of Time's combat is completely without impact. The prince's sword glides through sand monsters, no hit stop or nothing. Enemies will also block suddenly, meaning if we're in mid-combo, we can get tanked, and now the whole battle shifts into neutral, where our options are both varied, but also weirdly limited. We could try to vault the enemy and attack in midair, resulting in knockdown for an instant kill. We can parry an attack, should an enemy choose to attack sometime this millennium. We can switch targets and swang on someone else, though they're just as likely to tank us. Or we could do a wall attack. All hail the wall attack. Here's the thing about these varied options though, some straight up don't work on certain enemies. Like the chain guys will always block a wall attack. You failed me! Big red hammer guys will also always block wall attacks, and our only option aside from wailing and getting tanked is a vault attack, which can be reversed. Blue spearmen will block everything, reversing vaults, but have no answer to the wall attack. Blue captains are exactly the same. Short fat men sometimes have an answer to the vault, but no answer to the wall attack. Now this variation in enemy weaknesses sounds like it could be used decently by forcing us to vary our attacks and integrate the prince's agility into our combos, but combat encounters and enemy AI are sloppy and go on way too long. Instead of enemies having unique behaviors or AI packages, they all have the same one with different attacks for what moves do and don't work. This means that enemies will invariably swarm the prince, then just strafe him until one gets bold enough to make a move. Then they might all attack in sequence to keep us stun locked so they can stand around a little longer. Their swarming also limits our movement, as enemies will often cage us in when in great enough numbers, meaning our only option is to hold block and lame it out till it's cross Tekken. Meaning our only option is to hold block and lame it out like it's cross Tekken. This caging behavior would have meant a lot more if the prince didn't have Arkham Batman reflexes on his block. This man is a wall. No matter what direction or frequency he is attacked with, he just blocks it all. I haven't seen defense like this since I summoned Doom King Balladrock on Kiki's standby phase when she was sitting on game. Boy, was she pissed. You gotta get rid of Zombie World, sucker. That one's for you. You know who you are. Anyway, Prince of Persia, right? For every battle, your best bet is the wall attack. It's the most effective against the most enemies. It causes a knockdown for an instant kill, can't be interrupted, safe on block, whoa, look at me, can be mashed, and I think it even has iframes. That's invulnerability, invincibility, intangibility, whatever you like best. Iframes. It's also the only time we have iframes in the entire game, if that's true. I think I forgot to mention the dodge. We can dodge and it sucks. If you dodge behind an enemy, then start attacking, they can snap into a block and we get tanked. Getting behind a guy ain't even enough, and I've never had that problem before. Most enemies' attacks are wide-sweeping swings too, and so having no iframes on the dodge makes using it almost completely worthless. We can't even use it to catch a breather or reposition because enemies will teleport to us, and they attack at random with very little wind-up, remember that, so it's possible we get ganked right in the middle of a dodge after one or two guys decide to swoosh right in. At least once I got telefragged too. In the early game, combat can look cool as the prince switches between enemies with some of the most fluid animations the world had seen at the time. When those kicks, which by the way are super weak and don't always lead into a fluid combo, when those kicks get tanked, it throws a fat wrench into the acrobatic combat. It doesn't even take long to happen either. Within the first quarter or so of the game's combat, it shits the bed with all the stuff I mentioned before. We have no way to break guard, no way to switch up attacks to answer a block, no crowd control, agility gets shit on as often as standard attacks do. With the weird enemy rules and the high variety, our only fallback aside from the wall strike everyone until we can single out enemies with specific weaknesses move is the dagger, and that thing is great. It doesn't answer all the problems with the combat, but it can mitigate them. Depending on the amount of sand tanks we have and the amount of enemies we've defeated since acquiring a sand tank, we get access to some neat properties of the dagger. Namely, the slow mechanic. If you have a moon, you can use the dagger to lock an enemy out of the encounter for a while. Get 2 standard attacks on them, and you insta-kill them. You can also wall attack them. Unfortunately, you don't get any sand from this type of takedown, and since it takes 2 absorptions to refill a moon, and you can't refill a moon unless you have full sand tanks, you'll still have to engage with the standard combat, which means...
Bazing!
Enemies can't block the slowing attack, but can block a standard dagger strike. This means without sand, the dagger is worthless, as its attack is mad slow, and it has no combos even with the standard sword attack. Also, defeating enemies isn't just beating them down, probably should have mentioned this earlier, we have to hit them enough to get a knockdown, or just, then absorb them into the dagger, which takes a second. During this animation, we have no iframes. So if we go for the absorb as an enemy attacks, we're locked in and can't cancel the animation. They don't stay down long either, so it's possible to knock a guy down a couple times and still not kill his ass. With all these options and such fluid animations, you'd think the combat would at least feel good. But with impactless strikes and encounters that drag on forever, the identical enemy behaviors, that's all the combat has is the animation blending. The scarabs end up being the only fun fight towards the end of the game because they can't block. And don't even get me started on the birds and bats. It's like someone spent months debugging the ladder, ledge, and balance beam attacks, then realized they only needed it for like a single section, and made a big stink about it until someone added the later sections with these guys. The birds, I can respect. Because if you swing at the right time, you could take them out before they hit you, and that's cool. The bats can go to hell, though. Standing still to swing once every other year isn't fun, interesting, challenging, or legal. Ubisoft, go to jail. Then there's the parts where you have to protect Farah, and oh... Move, Farah! You have a bow! It's a ranged weapon! The elevator! Anyway, it's a good game. I asked myself about Sands of Time. I said, does it hold up? Then immediately thought, does Sonic 1 hold up? Sands of Time is an acrobatic platformer, a niche type of game. There isn't much to compare it to except for other games in the series. I think my brain chose Sonic as a comparison point because nothing is really like it. Spark the Electric Jester and Freedom Planet are the only other platformers I could think of that revolve around speed and momentum. Similarly, I could only compare Prince of Persia to Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. Even then, barely. Prince of Persia is so unique, you just can't go anywhere else for this type of platforming. Puzzle platform games do exist, like Trine and Celeste, but nothing includes the acrobatics and weight of the pop games. Sure, the platforming puzzle solutions are pretty linear in Sands of Time, but their context makes them interesting. I'd want to see a pop game that's like freaking hard. Like, gives us no guidance for the puzzles and stuff outside of what we can think to do creatively with the prince's agility. Maybe by incorporating physics. That'd expand the puzzles and the platforming's potential. I don't feel like expanding on how, but use your imagination. Maybe I just want Breath of the Wild with acrobatics. As it is, Sands of Time is a timeless game. Puns, ooh, I love it. With expansion on the subgenre, we might see a shift in that sentiment, but as it is, slim pickings. If Ubisoft feels like making video games one day, I hope they give the attention and love that Sands of Time had to a new entry in the franchise. Otherwise, give it to someone else. Please, I don't trust Ubisoft. Yo, your boy doing too much, dog. That was frickin' hard. If you liked it, like it, and then tell me what you liked about it. If you disagree with anything I had to say, please let me know. I started making these videos because I wanted to talk about game design, and I wanted to know if I'm nuts when I start looking at things, or if my points are poorly communicated. Don't blame me. I'm concussed. Anyway, all that being said, I had fun. I hope you all had fun. Ow. This kind of content, the structured content's gonna be kinda slow going because I'm one person making them and I'm making as good as I can. So, if you end up subbing for this kind of stuff, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of LPs gonna be between these episodes. But you could stick around for those because they're kinda fun too. You could check the Twitch, the Twitter, the whatever else, I don't know. We're only really on Twitch and Twitter, but you could check those things out if you're interested in like more of me, because Kiki wasn't in this video much, but she's the other half of the show. So if you're interested in the humor, you can check out the episodes that are going up alongside this one. Anyway, have fun. Just don't.